All right, we're live. Good to see everybody today. Guillermo Salazar here from Getting to Hell Yes. Lucky to have a guest from Ben Nowacky from HappyCo, president over there. Ben's been the president of HappyCo for just over a couple of years now, and one of the strongest organizations out there in the world right now talking about centralized maintenance. So really good conversation today. We're looking forward to. So reminder for everybody listening in: when we talk about Getting to Hell Yes, we're talking about buyers that are they're feeling a pinch in the problem, and they're looking to actually understand what that problem looks like. And they've probably thought about some alternatives or investigated different ways of solving things that may or may not be the solution we provide. And often it's looking like I've hired more people, I'm outsourcing it, or maybe I'm considering software. And one of the problems that we find when trying to find Getting to Hell Yes isn't just that they recognize they have a problem, but it's the timing of events that kind of forces a time wall on them to choose to solve that problem. And so this is kind of the conversation that's evolving around: how do we find those events? How do we begin to find those buyers that are ready to go to Hell Yes? So Ben, appreciate you taking the time today. Super excited to have the call. Tell us a little about yourself and then how you got in this role, and then what's Hell Yes feel like?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So like you said, I've been with HappyCo for almost 3 years now. I've been a president. I started out as the head of product and tech. So I ran the product and engineering teams, and then moved over into a larger role in the organization about a year ago. I kind of fell into the industry, honestly. I came from, previously I worked with a private equity firm that did a bunch of B2B investments. I went and worked for one of their portfolio companies in the IT space for about 3 years, helped kind of turn things around and kind of get things stabilized there with the product and tech stack. And it wasn't really a passion of mine. It was a very technical product. It wasn't something I was super passionate in. My background has always been in real estate. I went to, that's my background, that's my degree. I got an opportunity to work on a resident portal software stack when I ran my own agency years before that. So it's always been a passion of mine. And when coincidentally, I was looking on LinkedIn at new opportunities, and there was a job listing for HappyCo. And I was like, well, hell, who doesn't want to work at a company named HappyCo? Applied, and the rest, as they say, is history. So I've been here for a few years now. And like you said, we really focus on kind of the operational tech stack, right? So helping teams operationalize their portfolio. The elevator pitch is from acquisition to disposition. But where the product has really been the strongest for the longest is our kind of the operation side. So inspections, work orders, resident satisfaction, helping teams get more stuff done without necessarily adding more resources. So that's where we've really been focused on.
I find it really interesting. Like, also, I'm from outside the industry. Had some real estate investments, so kind of like curious about it for a very long time. Had lost some money, made some money, kind of along the way, both sides of the things, both sides of the experiences of it all. And as I got into it, like, I started really to recognize that there's a gap here from a data perspective. There's a gap here from an execution perspective. And similar to you guys, like, the operations piece it's just been its muddy middle for a long time in real estate. And the opportunity to solve that problem different ways is really obvious, right? And I think you see the obviousness of it when you're not from the industry.
Right.
And so now, along with that, while we recognize the opportunity, it's the ability to kind of find the type of buyer within that, that whole ecosystem, and when they're ready to buy. And so, like, some of the first questions that or things I needed to figure out was like, okay, so how does an operator act differently than an owner? How does an investor act differently than a fund investor act differently than an owner operator? All those different things, like, and they all have different Hell Yes motivations. And so when you guys are out there selling, like, what are you looking for in that Hell Yes buyer, and who are you finding the fastest and the most most repeatable sales cycles?
Yeah, it's interesting on different sides. It's a really interesting dynamic in multifamily. And if you don't come from the space, if you're in the space for years, it seems very commonplace and easy to understand. You have owners, you have operators, you have fee managers, you have this interesting mix of people, and each of them have a different pain that they're trying to solve for and a different thing that they're trying to deal with. When you come from outside of the industry and you join, you're like, what the hell is going on here? Like, you have ownership groups who barely talk to fee managers sometimes, and fee managers that are just doing their own thing, but trying to coordinate between multiple ownership groups, and they've got different tech stacks. So we've really been focused on trying to streamline that sales process. And like you say, get to hell yes a lot faster and more efficiently. So for us, when we think about like that ideal buyer persona, we've been hyper focused on the centralization wave that's in the industry. Yeah. And what we found is centralization means something so different to everybody that you talk to. There's no consistency amongst anybody. We've talked to some groups that are like, we've been centralized for years. And you're like, cool, what are you doing? Well, we have an IVR and people call into it. You're like, that's not even close. So some of those folks, when they think that though, it's the ones that we identify that we can get to hell yes fastest with are that truly understand the pain that they're going through, right? What is the problem that they want to solve, and what is the pain that they're suffering from? If they don't realize that there's a pain point that they're trying to solve for, then we're just talking to the wind. It doesn't mean any difference because they don't understand that there's an opportunity. As soon as somebody realizes that there's a better operating model and there's ways to become more efficient, and we don't need to treat every property like an island, and there are some economies of scale if we start thinking about our portfolio, not just a property. And regardless of ownership, even if you're a fee manager working with 12 owners, if you treat your entire portfolio that you're managing as an entire portfolio rather than a bunch of islands, you start to see some opportunities. And it's like that light gets clicked on, right? As soon as that light gets clicked on, that's the ones that we can talk to and really see the opportunity with something like a HappyCo or like an Iris, right? Where you're really taking opportunities in looking at your portfolio as a whole and getting the data, becoming better, more operationally efficient, looking at things and looking at, like, I draw analogies to something like e-commerce, right? E-commerce is very hyper-focused on data. They look at shopping cart abandonment, revisits, retargeting, where you're going, what you're looking at, everything else. And there's a huge trove of data that they've tapped into to really get you to buy. Multifamily is in the infancy of that stage where we're starting to get good data, but people don't understand how to operationalize it. And the easiest way, right? You can go all the way through the spectrum, all the way up to the tenants and the renters that are moving in and occupying, to figure out how do you optimize renewals, how do you maximize rents, all these sorts of things. But fundamentally, if your costs are still too high, it doesn't matter, right? Because your margins are never going to be there. So for us, getting to hell yes, the buyer is somebody who understands that there is centralization is not just a trend. This is the way that things are moving. And there's a real opportunity to become more efficient, and they want to become more efficient, and they want to start operationalizing data. They want to look at the data and figure out, okay, measure what matters. Let's pick something, let's measure it, and let's look to improve it over the course of the next quarter or two.
Have you found, so I love what you brought up there with respect to centralization. So I'm actually kind of thinking through right now, almost like a presentation or a position on, like, centralization is a strategy, right? It's not a best practice. There are best practices to execute centralization, but it is a strategy. And so having the questions around, what are you trying to achieve with that strategy? So we can tie it back to the core business metrics. And then what are you trying to achieve is different depending if you're the owner, the operator, or whatever, right? And so, like, I had a prospect call this week or previously last week. And literally at the end of the call, I was like, you often, when you're selling, you often ask the question, like, what if you don't solve this problem? What happens? And so kind of getting to the end of the call, and you can see this call is kind of going a little bit sideways. And I said, well, look, if we can agree that using a third party or using your own people is the same problem, and the guy's like, yes, because it's people in a space, then what are you going to do if you can't solve that?
Right.
Like, I literally said, hope. his colleague just started laughing. He's like, well, then we can agree this is not solvable with the current way of doing things. And it's pretty interesting to your point. Like, once they see it, they can't unsee it. And I think it's pretty unsettling when they realize that 1 to 100 is broken. It doesn't actually even apply. Like, if you're going to paper something 1 to 100, you may as well also put 1% interest rates in there, because both of those things are coming back in, like, the next business cycle. And you're just doing yourself.
The most interesting thing, though, is when you start talking to folks and you say, like, I love established paradigms in industries, because you really start driving in, and there are opportunities to break the system and to really find improvement. So my favorite question is, hey, what is your operating ratio, right? Oh, 1 to 100. Why? Why is it 1 to 100? And then they're like, well, that's just what everyone always does. Well, if everyone else jumped off a bridge, are you jumping off a bridge also? Like, why is it 1 to 100? And nobody can say. And it's this, when you start talking to folks that have been in this industry for a long time, I'm talking like 50, 60 years, they're like, well, that was the operating ratio that we've always operated on because it was the most efficient. We found that techs could solve a number of tickets. We figured out the number of tickets that a unit submitted on average per year and how many tickets could one tech reasonably accomplish. It's like, yeah, but that was when they were still plugging in power tools into the wall outlet and there was no battery powered tools, and Home Depot was 50 miles away and they never had what was in stock, or you had to go to an Ace Hardware and they had to order it and it took you 3 days to get it. Like, the paradigms have changed. The operating models have changed, but we're still stuck with this 1 to 100 ratio. And so whenever anyone says that, I love it. Like, it gives me a chance and say, okay, why are you operating like that? Why do you think that that's okay? What if I could tell you could get to 200 to 1? Would that be interesting to you? They're like, that's impossible. There's no way you can do it. And then we pull up a case study from a customer that's like, this customer's there today. We've helped them get there. And they're like, holy crap, like that gets them to hell yeah, really fast.
You know what I find really interesting? So like, we've been in this telemaintenance space for like 4 years, right? And different verticals. Like, we started in utilities and we got into home buildings, we got product companies. And so we're really like familiar with the centralized motion and the call center and all those things, contact center, however you want to call it. And like, when we talk about our numbers in terms of resolution rates, remote resolution, it makes people and it really unsettled. And then you guys just came out with your document, like, I don't know, what, a week, 2 weeks ago, like October, end of October. And it was awesome. So I'm like, look, this is the truth. Like, and then one of our previous competitors, they sold to American Home Shield, and they've been doing remote maintenance for like 4 years at the tens of thousands, right? Like a month or a week or whatever. And their numbers are the same. And so I talked to that CEO, I see him now and then, and I'm like, isn't it crazy that the number's 2/3? And he's like, it's wild. It's wild. And then when you talk to people about, you can do 2/3 remote resolution, no fault, you track no fault fixes, do you track, and they don't understand what it looks like, because someone's just always around.
Right.
And so like, because someone's always been around, they've got to be busy, and they're just doing busy work. They're not actually solving they're not improving the NOI of the property. And what I find interesting is that there's a conflict of interest between the operators that exists kind of naturally between the operators and the owners, where the operator, they put that person on there, if they're a fee manager, okay, they're collecting up the fees, but they're not wholly incented to drive NOI.
Right.
And I mean, they may at renewal as a manager, but not so much at, on a month-to-month basis. And if the accepted convention is 1 to 100, and they're not even filling those roles, then it's kind of breaking down all along the way. And it is interesting to kind of have that question, like, what's your operating ratio? Because, and I had the exact same conversation like 2 nights ago. Why is it 1 to 100? And then they break it out. Well, you got 400 units, and then you can afford it. And then you've got, a leasing, property admin, leasing manager, and then we're centralizing leasing manager. That's coming off site, which is great. And then now you're kind of moving into the maintenance side of things. And I do think that like what's blocking maintenance from a wholesale adoption is the sheer lack of data.
Right.
The fact that they don't know. Like, they often don't know how many tickets they do a week.
Well, and the challenge is, a lot of fee managers, depending on ownership groups we talk to, are working in 3 or 4 different PMS platforms, right? So it's not like the fee managers have an easy job where all the data is in one spot. So now they have to work and figure out, how do I do exports? How do I get data together? And then the concept of like the organizations, I'm starting to see a trend of increase where organizations are starting to say, yes, we have a data analyst in-house, or we have a business analyst, which is awesome. But even 2 years ago, it was rare. And it was only the very large operators or owners that would say, yes, we have a data analyst, or we have a data analyst department in the business, or BI department. Mm-hmm. But now that you're starting to see it, I think you're starting to see a wholesale change in the industry where people are understanding that, again, going back to measure what matters, if you can track things and you can start to understand the trends, you can affect that, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't have to be stuck with this 1 to 100 ratio. That's why centralization is so powerful, because you start thinking about things like specialization. Do I need to hire a locksmith that's all they do is deal with lockouts day in and day out and things of that nature? Yes, some organizations that makes sense. But if you don't have the data to see how many lockouts you're doing per month and how big of an impact is on your team or how many vendors you're using, you have no idea if that's a position that you should hire for. So the organizations that I see that are really starting to adopt and embrace centralization are the ones that are saying, yes, I'm not comfortable with my being at 13% net operating, cost, right? I want to drop that down. And the only way for me to do that is to start looking at things more holistically and to ask questions. Why are you only able to solve 4 work orders a day? Why are these each work orders taking you 2 hours? And then start to unpack. And it's not pointing a finger and saying, hey, maintenance tech or service technician, you're doing a bad job. It's help me understand your day. Like, what do you do? Oh, now I see. This is super inefficient. Why are we doing it this way? Why do you have to run to Home Depot 14 times in a day? Well, we don't have good work orders. We don't have good data. The resident submits a work order that says my sink is broken. That doesn't help. Like, my sink is broken could mean 14 different things, including a garbage disposal or a water maker, right? Like, none of those make sense. So the data is so important for organizations. And I wish I could yell it from a rooftop, where it's like, if I could tell you one thing in 2025 is to start measuring, start getting that data and start trying to affect some change in the organization, whatever it is, wherever in the org you do it.
You know, what I've been finding is that, to the same comment, is that I think that there's been no accountability for it.
Right.
Like, ultimately, when there was no accountability, it actually didn't make sense. There was no motivation to actually track it. And so here's the example, similar to what you're just describing. Like, I look at the kind of old, I'll say the old organization model, where you've got, maybe you've got a tech, you've got a super, you've got a leasing manager, you've got a PA, and a property manager on the site. Like, the boss was the property manager, right? And there was no director of maintenance for a region. And so consequently, it was just kind of like, and when you think about even just the way you described it, like, you're talking paper POs, people running there with a credit card to Home Depot. Like, there's no spend, there's no purchasing, there's no spend analytics, there's no vendor analytics, there's no desire. Nobody's going to get fired for that dollar being offline or off plan because you're just fixing it.
Right.
And so, like, since there was never an accountability structure, there was never a desire for data. And now you're starting to see regional directors of maintenance. You're starting to see national directors of maintenance. And those people now have the P&L to manage with accountability. And it didn't happen before. And so the data was allowed to be messy. And this is like literally up until last year. And in many cases, it's a big part of the market. It was allowed to be messy because people could just keep raising rents. And then that just hid the operational mess that was going on. It was like, just let's keep renting, keep raising rents, and we won't have more of a problem. Well, now we're in a world where we can't raise rents anymore. And like we were describing, like, if we're going to bring on like 2x the housing to solve the housing crisis, then this is a structural change. And then if your top line can't go anywhere, and your bottom line, let's say your real bottom line is being encroached by insurance and interest, then you've got your NOI, which is kind of even, that's also a bit archaic, right? Because like even NOI doesn't include the 2 biggest parts of the P&L, insurance and interest, and because they're presumed uncontrollable. So you take a look at that middle part. The middle part is just mostly maintenance.
Right.
If you got leasing has gone to centralizing group, so the revenue part of the P&L, your below the line stuff like interest and insurance is run by the managers. Then now you're in a situation where you've got to figure out what that maintenance part looks like. And if there's no accountability there, who's going to start tracking it? And so I'm along with you at the point that we've got to start tracking that data. And I think the vulnerability for that ambition is that we don't have the insights into the people that are capturing that data because it's still hand bombed. And I love what you guys just came out with the new AI work orders. Like, when we take a look at AI work orders as an example, like, we're starting to solve the problem at the granularity level where the data it's vulnerable to people putting the right data in, and consequently it doesn't roll up very well. It's late. It's maybe sometimes there's work orders that get made like 45 days late. We got an expression in home building, we call it ghost lists. And a ghost list is basically the list that someone keeps on the clipboard And those work orders
Yeah.
never even happen, right? We had in energy services, this is a long time ago, we'd see issues where vendors and third parties were collaborating, and like there's payoffs that were going back into the people that were running the maintenance shops. And so like there's all these different things that are occurring that people may or may not understand or be aware of because they haven't been tracking anything. So I love that. For 2025, start tracking maintenance, and then people go, how? Right?
Yeah, exactly. They say, how do I start tracking? What do I track? What's the most important thing to track? And the first thing that people always say is, well, I need time tracking on my work orders because I need to know how long work orders are taking so I can start understanding it. The challenge is, again, if you don't understand what you're solving for, you say, okay, great, we're going to do time tracking. One of two things happen. Every work order either takes 2 minutes or 24 hours because you're asking the service technician who's already overwhelmed to do more stuff, more bookkeeping, more customer support, more resident interactions, more general preventative maintenance. We keep overloading our teams with more and more work, and yet we're giving them no reprieve on a way to get more done or be more efficient, right? We're not equipping them to be more efficient. So then they're like, well, wait a minute, time tracking didn't work out. So therefore I can't figure anything out and everything's gone out the window. Well, that's kind of for me, like the gateway, because then you start to say, okay, why is everything taking 2 minutes or 24 hours? And then you start talking to service techs and they're like, I'm overwhelmed. I've got so much to do. I've got a resident barking in my ear saying that this is broken. They need to get to work. I've got a backlog of 14 other work orders I've got to get done today because somebody's already upset about them. And you want me to do preventative maintenance on the property. And you want me to do X, Y.
Yeah, and there's three make-readies. And there's 3 make-readies that we got to get.
Yeah, and oh yeah, by the way, that one make-ready, somebody's going to move in 2 days sooner than they originally were going to. So now you got to get those done also. And it's like, you got to be kidding me. And so we say often, like the maintenance techs on property are like the unsung heroes. People say like, hey, maintenance is an amenity at this point. But then you say, well, cool, how long does it take you on average to first contact for a work order? And they're like, oh, our SLA is 48 hours. And you're like, 48 hours before you even contact a resident? And they're like, yeah, that's pretty good, right? And we're like, no, that's terrible. Imagine you were sitting for 48 hours without your toilet working, and it's 48 hours before somebody even got in touch with you. They're like, oh yeah, I guess that isn't very good. So it's
in some states, they got to defend themselves in court.
It's nuts. But then they can. Well, look at the backlog. Look how many things we've got going on. Like it takes us this long. It's a broken system, and nobody. You're right. There's disincentives to fix it. So from like a fee manager perspective, part of my compensation is based on how many bodies I have on the property and how many people I staff up there, right? So why am I incentivized to lower the number of people? And from an ownership perspective, if I hear, oh, I'm going to centralize, I'm going to have a pod, now I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. A, I'm sharing resources with some other owner in the area, or B, my resident satisfaction is going to go down because somebody's not getting serviced as quickly as they should. And therefore my vacancy rates are going to go up. So I don't want to centralize. Don't do that. And now the fee manager is like, well, crap, I have 3 owners who are saying yes, and 1 is saying no. And I need his properties in this region in order to get the density if I'm going to do roving people. Yeah. So it's a very interesting push and pull. And you really have to get both sides to understand the value of centralization. It's not in reducing people. This is about making your teams more efficient and giving a higher resident satisfaction. Focus on those renewals now. That's where people should really be focused on from a leasing perspective. Yes, the backlog of the wait list of people coming in is going down slightly, and you don't have that list of, hey, I've got 14 people that are going to take this place before it even goes up. You need to put bigger focuses on renewals and getting that. Hey, it's easier to retain a resident than it is to find a new resident. Even if I'm only getting 10% uplift a year, it's still far better for me to renew this person because they're a great tenant. They pay their rent on time every month. They opened 1 work order in the past year. They don't have any pets. They have no kids. They're just like, it's easy. So it's like you said, we were talking earlier, I think the free money scenarios where interest rates were so low, they're long gone. It's going to take years before we're back to even 4%. Like, I just don't see it happening. And I think like you had said, a lot of people were kind of just had this wait and see mentality. This has been a hell of a year with the elections and everything, and not being political, but I think just a lot of people were waiting to see what the outcome was, no matter what it was. Now we're starting to see people like things loosen up. Okay, I know what the next 4 years are going to look like now. I kind of know where things are going. Interest rates are kind of where they're at. There's not going to be huge fluctuations. So I need to make some decisions on how I'm going to operate for the next 4 years.
Well, I think, and they're all looking at their year-end reports right now, and they're not as good as they were in 2023. Right? You got, and so there's the push for change, because this, what happened in 2024 isn't a good plan for 2025. And so there's this desire to seek alternatives, right? And so I'm finding when I talk to folks, and I'm like, hey, like, what are you gonna? How are you gonna adapt? How are you gonna? What's your plan? What are you thinking about, right? And they talk about the alternatives. Well, we're thinking about doing functional pause. We're thinking about doing this, and I'm kind of okay. Well, those are good alternatives. And this is kind of getting to the point about centralization as a strategy. Because I was like, well, what's your goal? What's your objective here? Well, we're in high-end luxury, and I'm like, well, I don't really think you might not want to centralize. Right. If you're charging $10,000 a month for rent, then you should have that's gold-plated service. Like that's what you expect, but that's not most of the units in the country, right? Right. So then let's think about what that feels like, because, and I was talking, I don't know what it was on, but it's this whole now new understanding of the customer's journey, the resident's journey, and this kind of we're starting to understand and classify what all of our residents look like. So it's not just luxury, Section 8, market price, student. They all have different demand pulls from a maintenance perspective, or I'll just call it operations. And there's going to be different models for each one, and that's okay. You think about in airline, right? I try and pull off metaphors that people are really accustomed to. If you go to a Four Seasons, it's different than if you go to a Holiday Inn, right? And you're paying for something different. It's a different market, and it should be different, differently done. If you're going to an Airbnb, sometimes you don't even see it. There's a good chance you might not see anybody, right? And that's what you want. Exactly. And so it's kind of those. It's interesting because there still is this well, I've got to have somebody there, but in many cases they can't even hire that job, and then on top of that, you ask the question why. So when you guys are out there talking and you're hearing objections, what are the common objections that you hear? Well, for starters, what have they usually tried before they decide they got to do something different? We'll start there. What have they usually tried before they try to do something different?
We hear all sorts of gamut. So to your point, a great point, hiring is becoming more and more difficult, right? So just finding quality folks to even staff up a property is becoming harder. So then they're like, well, we need to focus on retention. So let's give them a pizza party once a month, and that'll help, right? And then the service tech's for the love of God, if I get another pizza party, I'm gonna vomit.
Hug and chug.
They just don't care, right? A lot of service techs, they're motivated financially, and so then they say, okay, well, we're gonna do bonuses based on make readies or something like that. But then our CEO often says, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. You start incentivizing the wrong things, and then another metric goes to trash, and then you start wondering why, and then you refocus over here, and then this other thing goes to trash. So we've seen that. We've seen people say, well, we're just going to go to pods, and that'll solve everything because that's what centralization is, right? Just a pod. And you're like, no, it's way more than that. It's not just, hey, I'm going to have a roving technician, 3 or 4 roving techs. There's a lot that goes into this. You really have to understand what that team is going to solve for. And then we start asking, well, are you breaking it up into a make ready team plus a resident facing team? No, we just have one team doing everything. Well, how are you going to have 3 guys now that have more properties, do more unit turns in addition to resident facing work orders? They're like, oh crap, we didn't think about that. So then they're like, well, then we have to break it up. Now we have a unit turn team that just does unit turns on the properties. So we've seen the pod structure. But if you don't have density, that's the other thing. People are like, well, I don't have the density necessary to pod. Okay, well then what else are you doing? Why don't you hire a person to triage every work order on the West Coast that can work later in the evening and on the East Coast so you get longer fluctuations? So yeah, we could do that. I'm like, you're starting to centralize. So What I think is what we've seen be unsuccessful is everyone's assumption that centralization is one thing and it's one size fits all. And if I'm not doing roving teams or pods or pick your term, then I'm not centralized. Or if I don't have the density, then therefore centralization means nothing to me. Centralization is such a spectrum of what you can do that when you start opening people's eyes up and talk about what others are doing, like, hey, we hire only specialists for our properties. I have a lock tech, I have an appliance person, I have a painter, I have all of these different things. Then they're like, well, okay, that sounds interesting. Like maybe I can adopt some of those things in, right? But what the thing that I think fails more often than not is just saying, well, I'm going to have a pod, because then they don't think through, well, if I'm a fee manager, I have to rewrite all my property management agreements also to account for the different cost structure. Mm-hmm. And I have to convince my owners that this is the right approach and why this is the best way and why resident satisfaction is still going to be there. So that is usually destined to fail, is just saying, well, centralization means pods. I'm going to do pods. And if it doesn't work, I can't centralize.
Well, and you layer on the constraints. Like I find it, constraints of density, right? Like I find it, it's shocking that the operating model is constraining $100 million investments.
Right.
Like that to me, as like a former finance person, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like you're not going to go, like you go where the money is, right? Like if you can get rents and you can get people in a certain spot, like the SFR, they were talking about Boise, Idaho, right? Okay, Boise, Idaho is growing. There's a great differential there. People are making money. Awesome. But you're going to choose to not invest there because you don't have an operating model there? That just doesn't make sense. So you got to figure out a way to make sure that the money works. And that's the part that I find is really remarkable about the constraint. Like you're going to let that get in the way of making a return on your $100 million investment. That part blows my mind. And so like, I'm surprised that we haven't seen more owners say, wait a second. We're, like BTR exists solely because single family scattered site was too hard to operate. Is too expensive to operate.
Right.
And so if you solve the operating problem, you'd actually be able to go back to a more flexible and agile capital model. And so I just find like it just keeps recurring over and over again, how like this belief that you have to have density to be successful in operations is a blocker, and in every single part of the business. And so like, go ahead.
I think it's because, if you talk to folks again in multifamily, the old, the adage is once you're in multifamily, you never leave, right? That's what everyone says all the time. And for a lot of it, it's true. And I think it's just because, the reason those problems exist, because it's like, well, I can't find the money or I can't make this operating model work, is because there are so many people that have been in the industry for so long. What I really think and what I really enjoy seeing, and I know a few owner operators who will not hire anybody for their team that's worked in the industry. So they purposefully bring people in from outside the industry. So they'll bring former SaaS account executives in sales in as leasing agents, right? A junior salesperson as a leasing agent, because they're like, they understand sales, they understand sales methodology, and they're treating this like a regular sale, not just like, hey, I'm going to show you a unit, and like they're salespeople. They think about the model differently. So I think you need kind of this influx and a new wave of thought leaders and thinking differently in the industry to kind of really make a paradigm shift wholesale. Because if people move from one property or one ownership group or one organization to the other, and it's just very kind of incestuous where nobody leaves and nothing ever comes in, it becomes too closed off and too homogenous of a system, and everyone is just regurgitating the same things. You really need fresh ideas and somebody to challenge the status quo. Like that's why I love the 1 to 100 number, is because it's so established. Everyone just accepts it as fact, but nobody knows why. And then when you challenge it and say, well, we can do better, and I can show you how you can do better, like, I don't understand. Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Totally. Like you see look on their faces, and it is a bit of a, divide by zero, right? Just like you get an error. It doesn't compute. This isn't a bend, right? It's just like, I don't see it. How would, you ask the question, like, just, even the couch, like, how would it change your business if you didn't have to rely on density? How would it change your business if you went to 1 to 200? And, like, 10,000 units, you got like a $7 million payroll.
It's massive.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money. And so like, and that's just maintenance techs. And so it is wild. And so like when we're going to market, let's kind of get into the, what are the people feeling when they're committing to change? Like, what do you guys see? Like, what do you look for? It's because it's not just going to be like I think we're beyond just the traditional buyer's journey where it's like educate, inform, offer alternatives, and then they're going to find their way down the funnel. Like they're not going to do something unless something is being forced on them. So like, what do you see, or what do you guys look in the market, or what do you kind of like listen for in terms of like, is it bad reviews? Is it, turns in, is it, vacancy in a market? Like, how do you guys think about going at that to find the people that are already there?
Yeah, the one, it's always great too, because it's the ones that are having the pain but don't realize that they're there yet. And then when you shed light on like, oh, let me connect the dots for you, they're like, oh crap, I can do this, and I can fix 4 things by doing one thing. The keywords that I listen for a lot of times are, hey, our properties are up for a refi. We're in a T12 period, right? Yep. I love that one because they're looking for every opportunity to affect their balance sheet. And if I can show them 3 or 4 ways to affect their balance sheet holistically that are real and tangible and not just pie in the sky, then they're like, yeah, absolutely. So I love that.
That's an owner.
Yeah.
That's an owner. Yeah.
And even fee managers, because fee managers, if the ownership group is in a T12 or looking to refi, the fee managers are incentivized to help increase revenue for that property, to help, because they want to keep the contract, right? So if the ownership says we're refinancing, we have to affect the balance sheet, fee management is going to do everything they can to help move that along to be good partners also.
Yeah.
So that's one we hear often. The others are, like you said, hey, we're really focused on resident satisfaction. Nothing is more important to us than resident satisfaction. And then you start asking like, well, what are you doing today? Well, we have food trucks come in once a month, and we do community events and, things like that. Yeah. All of that sort of stuff. So that's a key that like, okay, you want to invest in the resident experience. And then you start asking questions like, do you have a self-solve portal? Like, how do you help residents self-solve things when they want to? How do you deal with the residents in the generation where they don't want somebody in their unit, or they're used to dealing over text messages or ordering on DoorDash? How are you dealing with those residents? And they're like, we're really not. It's the same system for everybody. You're like, well, what if I could show you a way that would help increase the satisfaction of those residents that don't want direct handshaking interaction, but still deliver them a great experience? Yeah, absolutely. The other one is, hey, we're really looking to, when somebody says, hey, we're exploring centralization. That's a great word just to use in general when they say that, because 9 times out of 10, they don't know what they're looking for. They just know that A, it's a buzzword that everyone's doing it and they have to start doing it. And B, they're really starting to see the effects on their balance sheet and they really want to start moving the needle. So that's when you can ask questions like, great, what are you thinking from a centralization standpoint? Oh, pods. Okay, well, why are you thinking pods? Because of X, Y, and Z. Well, what if we could tell you there's 3 other operating models and we can show you and we can work with you? We have today in HappyCo, we've got 4.5 million units on our platform. So we work with a bunch of owners and operators across the whole variety, like you said, from affordable to high rise to, to class A to everything, that we can help and be a reference, an industry expert that can help you understand, what does centralization really mean, right? Here's the different operating models. Here's what you have to think about in each operating model. Here's the pros and cons. So those are great buzzwords that I love to hear, because it means somebody's open to change. And if they're open to change, they're open to exploring possibilities, and they're not just saying, well, no, this is the way we've always done it, and therefore we can't deviate. We don't want anything new.
Yeah. One thing that we hear often is that, like, if you start digging into kind of the second order questions, it's like, well, we really would like to have some automation. And you ask about the data, and you're like, well, if you don't have a system in place that's capturing data, automation's off the table. It's not, it's not going to happen. Oh, maybe we'll get a bot to do that or something like that. And you kind of like, you're asking to go to leap from manual screwdriver to like an automated bot. Like that's going to be very complicated for you guys to absorb. What does this roadmap look like? And so we're having a lot of road mapping conversations, a lot of like conversation like, okay, like let's just kick this up and spin it up, and we'll show you that it will show you the change, right? And I often do say, like, and I do promise you, the second you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. You know, and that language is lands pretty frequently. We also hear from an objections perspective, we hear like, but residents want us to fix things. I'm like, no. Residents don't want things broken, and their time is more valuable than, you know, your availability. Right. And so people get frustrated. You know, the number one controllable reason for churn is maintenance. And so like, this is something that has to totally be fixed. And so we go to the market. We're looking for people that have like open job positions, right? There's a lot of job openings that are open there. Okay, they probably have a problem for maintenance if they're trying to find people. We look at, you know, just in terms of the filter. And if there's somebody who's having open job positions, then it's difficult. It's a very obvious conversation that they have unspent dollars on maintenance, or maybe they're planning for growth, or they're just constantly hiring. But it gives a conversation around that. And then obviously, like in markets where you're feeling the pressure of revenue, like in Austin as an example, where vacancies off, rents are off. So then there's a good opportunity there to have the conversation. That's kind of what we're finding, but it still is, to your point, they have to have made a mental leap, or prepared to make a mental leap to try something different, or have accepted the status quo is no longer possible. Like really, when you ask the question, like, what's your plan for 2025? You know, is it to continue with this exact same model? And many people are like, we can't. It's not practical.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the solutions too, people need to think about it as not just being, you know, you want to have a solution in place to be proactive for sure. But what about that insurance policy, right? Because the days of somebody staying at a single company for 20 years and retiring with a gold watch are very few and far between these days. So if you lose one maintenance tech at a property, or God forbid two, your whole resident experience is significantly impacted. And so you really need to have solutions in place, almost as an insurance policy on top of it, right? So, hey, I have this overflow thing that can help triage and kind of work through work orders, and it's going to help my team give them more time back. But if one person leaves, I have something that can pick up some of the slack at least. And you're right. People don't want their work orders fixed or fixed quickly. They don't want to have the problem to begin with. They're like, I pay a bunch of money. I just don't want to have a problem. And if I do, I want to solve it the way I want to solve it, which doesn't necessarily mean I want somebody coming in my unit. It may mean, hey, I'm a blue collar worker. I want to fix it myself, but I'm not a plumber. So help me understand how to fix it. I want to do it. I don't want somebody in my unit.
One of the things that we had, one of our customers, this is a couple of years back, where we had this kind of bit of a total, what do you call it, like eye-opening conversation. And it was when we started talking to them about, it isn't time to resolve. Think of it as downtime. Like your customer is suffering through downtime. And so it isn't that I get 48 hours to respond to it. Like think of it that they've gone 48 hours without a toilet, right? And it could have been some pretty, didn't do this. Ben guy sounds pretty smart and intelligent. But you think about the gap that you would have as an as a resident, and you're suffering through downtime. Like the reason why we started Iris, is my car was locked in my garage for 3 days. And I live in suburbia, and your car is locked in your garage because the garage door was busted. And the guy literally showed up, banged it with a hammer, and said, if I could have seen it, I could have solved it remotely.
Exactly.
And then charged me $300, right?
Right.
And I was like, motherfucker, right? I was like, you got to be kidding me. And so this has got to be solved, right? Because I'll be willing to swing a hammer, and because I want my garage. Because what's more important to me is I can get my car out of my garage. That's the problem I'm trying to unblock. So I'm finding really a lot of these positioning statements are aligned with like jobs to be done. We're trying to figure out like the resident, if it's a filter swap, like if you've been, let's say for example, you've got no AC and you've had no AC for 48 hours and it's 110 degrees outside. And then they get there and they realize that it was just because a breaker was flipped.
Right.
You're going to lose your mind because you've been suffering for 48 hours, right? You mean it was just that? Yep. Thanks very much. Work order complete. Like, no. You just disregarded the value of my time because it wasn't because of your system. And that is just like, it's starting to really, persist because of the pains that we're seeing with respect to renewals and vacancy. And so it's very interesting because it's happening in real time.
Yeah. What really excites me is I think like long term, and I think through like where is the industry going in the next 5 years, and I start like really putting on my vision cap and my grand ideas hat. What I really am excited for, especially with all of these building management systems and IoT and everything else, is what if you get to the point where nothing ever breaks because you're monitoring and you're telling the resident ahead of time, hey, by the way, it looks like your water filter in your water maker is about to expire. We're just going to drop one off on your front step with a link to a YouTube video to show you exactly how to change it. If that doesn't work for you, we already have a work order open for you. Just respond back to it and let us know, and we'll have somebody come by and change it out for you. Or, hey, it looks like there's a problem with your dryer. We're getting an error code. Do you mind if we have somebody come by and take a look at it for you proactively? The resident's like, I just did a load of laundry and there was no problem. So imagine a point where with all of these connected devices and all of this data and all this intelligence, if you could get proactive and identify problems before they happen, so there is no downtime for a resident, then like that's the greatest experience in the world. And if I'm a resident and somebody says to me, hell yeah, like you just replaced my water maker, my water filter before it expired. You sent me a new, somebody came in and changed the flush kit in my toilet because it had been too old and they didn't do it when the unit turned. And I moved in and I put in a requisition to have a TV mount hung on a wall, and it was already hung before I moved in. This is the greatest. Why would I ever buy a place? Like, this is just like genies popping up everywhere, fixing things before they
Little elves.
Like, yeah, it's like the greatest experience in the world. And I think like if the industry can imagine, how do we get to that panacea? It's not easy, it's not fast, and it's going to be painful. But if we can imagine how to get to that point where we can be proactive in our operational support of our residents, like that's where we should all be striving for. And that's what we should be shooting for.
Well, especially when you look at like, if you go to industry and look at the cost of a corrective maintenance order versus a preventative maintenance order, it's like 7 or 8x.
Absolutely.
Right. Especially when you consider the cost of downtime. Right. So like, I mean, sure, we're not running factories here, but if like when a conveyor belt goes down in a factory, you have the corrective maintenance expense of fixing that conveyor belt. But in addition, you've got the downtime of the production that's off. Right. And so you get this like 6, 8, 9, 10x corrective versus preventative. We need to think about these things in terms of like corrective versus preventative, because the cost of that corrective maintenance order has to include that downtime.
Absolutely.
And you just don't think about that, because that downtime is inconvenience, which equals a bad review, which equals a churn on the unit. And it's so much easier to run programs on a predictive basis when you have the data. And like one thing that we used to talk about in maintenance systems was like when you're looking at oil changes in a car, right? Like we're all recommended to change our oil, I don't know, every 8,000 miles or 5,000 miles. I can't remember the number, but it's like, did you really need to do it at that often? Like it's a number that's put out there. It's like the 1 to 100, just because it's the least worst number. But if something's not moving that often or whatever, it's being driven in a certain way, like you don't need to do that kind of maintenance, but you do need to be able to listen to maybe the firing of the engine so that you can predict on what the corrective action, the predictive action should be versus just doing it to do it. And so that all takes data, right? And so the data that's not there right now needs to emerge. And so like what you guys are doing with the AI work orders, and centralizing all this data pieces and bringing that all together is going to enable that future world. And what I find really interesting, you kind of touched a little bit about this on the SaaS perspective, is that if we think about rental revenue as recurring revenue, like this is SaaS subscription model revenue, like ARR, right? It starts to really think about things as not just rentals and renewals. We're actually trying to create a recurring revenue stream here that has a higher lift on it than just regular transactional revenue. So It isn't just a lease, we're creating this is an opportunity to create a 4-year revenue stream.
This is my MRR. I'm creating MRR every month.
Yeah. And so when you got MRR and your job is renewals, like in our business, our job is renewals, right? Or expansion. So how does that change the mindset as your approach to the customer? Because the renewal and the expansion is how our businesses are evaluated. And so taking a look at that and that mentality and pushing that down into the way things are done, you realize that residence experience is so important. right? And let's think about what the resident wants, not how we do things. And the functional.
I just got married, and now I may need to go from a 1-bedroom to a 2-bedroom. How awesome would it be if the property was proactive in saying to the resident, hey, congratulations on just getting married. It sounds like your family's expanding. By the way, we have a 2-bedroom unit on a bottom floor with a walkout porch, and we can move you into it. It's only going to cost you $200 extra a month. And we have it ready today. We can help you move. We'll have a service come by, help you box everything up, and we can get you moved this week if you want. Yeah, absolutely. My wife hates climbing up 3 flights of stairs. Yep. Move me down there.
Yep. Things like that. And that's, and I think to do that, we've got to move from these like individual, every property is its own island,
right,
to a common understanding of how we do things. And then you get into this model of like, this is like the Four Seasons operating model, right? This is the Ritz-Carlton operating model, where they're bringing that predictive understanding of what the guest experience is, in this case, the resident experience, and we're using that to change the way it looks because we want to drive a higher renewal. We want to drive recurring revenue.
Yeah, the challenging part too is with operations too is the number one thing that gets pushed off because of lack of time or money is preventative maintenance. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to have a system with the data to help you understand what does my preventative maintenance load look like and how do I plan for it so it doesn't get pushed off, because if I do push it off, next year, it's going to be 3x the burden of what it was last year.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting talking about just even the budget lines for preventative maintenance. Like people don't even budget, or a lot of owners, operators are having a hard time even penciling in what that feels like for their annual budgets. And so like things like roof, like how do you contingency for roofs, for HVAC, for all those? You're buying in your access control system that's coming in, and you're adding more capital to it, but you're not thinking about how you've got to manage that capital. And so the preventative maintenance piece kind of just falls off, or it gets into that, hey, we really should do this kind of like mentality, and it ends up breaking and costing even more money because now you're doing it's the after hour stuff.
Absolutely.
So as it kind of like when your buyer's journey, like as people are moving down the road, obviously there's alternatives to all solutions out there, right? And you guys are great because you have this great API platform that you guys have put out there, and you're connecting and everything. There are other products out there. When you guys go up against those other products, how does that conversation, how does that kind of like evolve, right? Because like, well, I already have a maintenance order system, or, I've got, let's go, everyone's got a PMS already. And so now you're having a conversation with a prospect, and they're like, why wouldn't I just use this existing one? How does that go?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it goes a couple ways, but usually, for me, I'm not about selling something, right? I don't want to just sell you and convince you I'm the best solution, because that doesn't ultimately benefit either one of us, because you're going to use it, you're going to hate it, or it's not going to fit your need. And then you're going to churn and you're going to tell 3 people about it. Right. So for me, I just say, okay, cool. That's great. Thanks for sharing. Let's work through some pros and cons analysis here. Like, let's go through. And if the other solution is the better fit for you, by all means, like I will happily tell you that's the best solution for you, because I want to help you find what's the best operating model for you. What's the best solution that fits your needs? It's not always going to be HappyCo. I like to think it is, but unfortunately it's not. So we go through that kind of pros and cons. We ask a lot of questions. We really want to understand the business and be good partners, because over the long term, I believe the partnerships are what prevails. And I think that's what some folks in the industry kind of forget, right? It's transactional. It's very much sell and then move on. I love talking with customers, and we get our NPS scores come in, right into Slack. Every time somebody rates the app or provides an NPS score, they come right into Slack. And Jindo, our CEO, or myself respond to every low score personally, not automated. We respond personally and say, hey, what didn't you like? What isn't working? What can we do better? It's those interactions that I think are really helpful. And those are the things that I point out, like how important is something like onboarding or customer support for you. If it's important, then here's what we do. I can't speak to what others do, but this is what we do. How are they going to support you in the long term? What are you looking for in a good partner? And I think that's, it's very much feature driven. I think when a lot of folks, when they talk about competitive positioning, it's, well, this feature versus this feature. That's a losing battle, because everyone has similar features and you're never going to win on a feature war. So it's really about the partnership and establishing that rapport and that partnership with the company. So that's where I really try to differentiate HappyCo is we're partners. We're not just looking to sell you and then move on. We want to partner with you on your success. We want to understand how are you using the app. The features that we develop are 95% driven by our customers. We go out, we talk to customers, we ask a lot of questions. They give us a lot of great ideas. We incorporate that into the roadmap. We build it out. We ask more questions. I think it's less common than you would hope in SaaS, where I think too many people are just looking outwards and thinking they have the grand idea to solve a problem. You can't solve a problem if you're not talking to customers. So long answer to your question. When we position ourselves against competitors, I don't really see this as like, this is what we have and this is what they have. This is more about what does the partnership look like over the long term? Yes, the features, we're going to solve your problems, but what are you looking for in a true solution? And that's where I try to really differentiate us from anybody else that we're dealing with.
It's fair conversation. And especially since like the incumbent softwares and alternatives out there are relatively monolithic.
Right.
And so like when you're having a conversation about agility, about the moving parts part of the business, it does open it up for a fresher conversation, especially if someone is feeling the pain. Like, and this is what I'm saying is interesting about these new roles that are emerging with respect to maintenance, where you're getting, leadership accountability for outcomes. And so they're, finally feeling the pain of having no data, of having no people, of having, let's say much more interested ownership groups. Like I hear owners are like, they're double clicking on any invoice over $200.
Absolutely.
Like, really? That'd be mind numbing to have that kind of in the back on the back of your shoulder every single time you're trying to solve a work order, right? And so like it's interesting to see how this is all shifting. When you take a look at your groups and your experience as you're kind of coming into Hell Yes, like what would you give advice? What advice would you offer for a person that's just joining HappyCo as in a sales role and they're looking to kind of like start get some traction with respect to their reps? What kind of advice would you say to them, give them to make them more successful?
I tell so what we like to do is internally, I like to have folks sit in many different seats in the company. So even if you get hired as an account executive, I feel like you should be sitting in support for at least a week when you start, right? Understand the things that are coming in and how things are happening. After that, I say, spend the first 30 days talking to customers and listening to customers, because you're going to absorb more about the pain that people are suffering and the problems that people are trying to solve than you will trying to do anything else. So we advocate heavily for new hires that come in, and I would say for anybody in the industry, spend your first 30 days talking to customers. Understand if you're from the outside the industry, ask a lot of dumb questions. Nobody's going to fault you for it in the first 30 days. Ask every dumb question imaginable. I still ask dumb questions. Talk to or listen to customers. There's so much technology out there that's recording every call these days. You can listen in asynchronously on your mornings while you're having your cup of coffee, whatever it is. That's probably the best feedback I can give anybody, is just really understand your customer and what they're solving and the pain that they're suffering. And if you can understand the pain, and not just at the top level where if I'm an account executive, I can say, yeah, you're trying to centralize. I understand these 3 things are a problem for you, but you intrinsically understand what they're trying to solve for. And you can ask the right questions back to them and says, well, what about this? Have you thought about this? That starts to develop your authority and your understanding and your respect, right? So that's where I advise folks is just really, really dive deep, spend your first 30 days, whatever industry, whatever market segment you're in multifamily, just listen for 30 days. Don't do anything, take no actions, listen.
I love it. That's great advice. I mean, I think that it's all about stories about people. And if you're listening to customers, you listen to residents having a complaint or whatever, and you're kind of getting into that, then you can kind of mentally attach why you're doing this job, because otherwise you're behind a screen just kind of like pounding the keys. But if you can think about Ben in unit number 106 and with with AC, no AC for 48 hours, and realize that we can solve that problem faster, better, quicker, cheaper, then you can start attaching yourself to the outcome and feel good about the work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
Love it. Who should we talk to next?
Oh, that's a great question. There are so many awesome people to talk to. I'll have to think about that one.
You can find, no worries. We can defer on that one. If you want to chat with you and learn more about HappyCo or learn about your role, how's the best way to get a hold of you?
You can email me directly, ben@happy.co, or just go to the website, happy.co. Tons of information there, and you can reach out to somebody. We'll get in touch. Always happy to chat with anybody about anything. Problems, interests, pain points. Doesn't even have to be about HappyCo specifically.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. Well, appreciate all the time today. This is a super good conversation. Love the permission to thread around different types of conversations. Everyone listening today online, thank you for joining us. This will be in a podcast probably in a couple of weeks. Follow it on Apple. Follow Getting to Hell Yes on Apple or Spotify. Ben, thank you for your time today. It's super insightful. Love the takeaway on listening to customers, and appreciate everyone for tuning in. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Guillermo.
All right.